If you stay here, don't expect anything more than food, firewood, and four walls. I don't need company. I need labor." Those were the first words Rachel Monroe heard as she stepped down from the dusty old truck into the biting cold of Wyoming's mountains. Before her stood a tall man in a worn gray flannel shirt, his boots crusted with dried snow, his gaze sharp as a blade, his face weathered by the sun. Jack Whitmore, 32, owner of one of the oldest ranches in Jackson Hole, loomed like part of the landscape itself, wild, solitary, unforgiving. Rachel pulled her coat collar higher, clutching her battered backpack, the only thing she'd brought with her after fleeing Kansas. She met his words with a stiff nod. "I'm not here for friends. I just need work and a place where I won't freeze to death." Jack said nothing more. He turned and trudged toward the small wooden cabin nestled in the vast snow-covered pastures. She followed her footsteps, sinking into the snow heavy like her heart. Inside the house was surprisingly warm, not luxurious but clean. A wood stove glowed red wooden chairs with leather cushions, oil lamps casting a golden light. The air smelled of burning wood pine and dried orange peels. "Your room's upstairs on the left. Breakfast at 6. I don't call twice," he said, then vanished into a room off the kitchen, the door closing with a firm click. Rachel stood alone, shivering from the cold, but more from the fact that she had nowhere else to go. She had lost everything. Family, job, friends, all swept away because she dared to refuse an arranged marriage to the son of a wealthy tycoon in Kansas. 4 months ago, she'd considered ending it all. A week ago, her bank account held less than $70. And now an email from an old college friend. "My uncle manages a cattle ranch in Wyoming. They need a housekeeper, someone to handle meals. No questions about your past, just survive the winter." So here she was, in this remote wilderness where the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Rachel knew this wasn't a place for pity, but it might be a place to start over or end quietly. She didn't know that right here amid these weathered walls and deep snow, a man who seemed emotionally dead and a woman with nothing left to lose would find themselves again. The truck that had dropped her off rumbled away down the snow-packed road, leaving Rachel truly isolated. She slung her backpack over her shoulder and stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door against the wind. The warmth from the stove seeped into her bones, but it did little to thaw the ice in her chest. She climbed the creaky stairs to her room, a small space with a single bed, a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser, and a window overlooking the endless white expanse. No mirror. She unpacked her few belongings, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a faded photo of her younger self smiling in a Kansas field before everything went wrong. Downstairs, she explored quietly. The kitchen was stocked with basics, flour, canned goods, a slab of bacon in the fridge. She found the woodpile by the back door and added a log to the stove, watching the flames leap up. It reminded her of her grandmother's house back when life was simple. But simplicity was a luxury she'd lost. Her family had disowned her after she walked out on the engagement party. "You're throwing away our future," her father had shouted, his face red with rage. The tycoon's son was supposed to save their failing farm, but Rachel couldn't marry a man she didn't love, a man who saw her as a business deal. She'd fled to the city, taken odd jobs, but the depression had crept in. One night, standing on a bridge over the Missouri River, she'd stared at the dark water below. Only a stranger's kind word had pulled her back. Now in this cabin, she vowed to survive. No more weakness. The clock ticked toward evening. Rachel prepared a simple meal, eggs, toast, coffee. She set the table for 2, though she wasn't sure if Jack would join her. When he entered, stomping snow from his boots, he paused at the sight. Sit, she said quietly. It's ready. He did eating in silence. No thanks, no complaints. When he finished, he pushed back his chair. Chores start at dawn. Don't be late. She nodded, clearing the plates. As he retreated to his room, she washed up the hot water, soothing her chapped hands. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. She climbed to her room, burrowed under the quilt, and stared at the ceiling beams. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams of Kansas storms mixing with the howl of Wyoming winds. Days blurred into a rhythm, mornings coffee and breakfast, afternoons cleaning, mending fences if needed, helping with the cattle when Luther, the old hand, allowed it. Evenings quiet solitude. Jack was a man of few words, but his presence filled the space. Tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that spoke of years wrestling the land. He rarely smiled, but his eyes, gray like storm clouds, held a depth that intrigued her. One night, as snow fell thickly outside, Rachel sat by the fire mending a tear in his shirt. He watched from his chair. "Why Wyoming?" he asked suddenly. She paused, needle in hand. Needed a change. Kansas wasn't home anymore. He grunted but didn't press. It was the first crack in the wall between them. Rachel didn't know then that Jack's walls were built from loss too. His parents gone in a car accident years ago, his fiancée lost to illness shortly after. But as winter deepened, those walls began to thaw one quiet evening at a time. Rachel adapted quickly to the harsh rhythm of the Whitmore ranch. Mornings began in the pre-dawn dark, the air crisp and biting as she rose to stoke the wood stove. The flames crackled to life, chasing away the night's chill, and she set about preparing breakfast eggs, scrambled with whatever scraps of bacon or cheese were on hand, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire, and coffee strong enough to jolt the senses awake. She worked methodically, her hands moving with a precision born from necessity. No flourishes, just efficiency. The ranch demanded it. Jack and Luther arrived together, their boots thudding on the porch as they shook off the snow. Luther, a grizzled man in his 60s, with a perpetual squint and a flask of bourbon hidden in his coat, nodded curtly, but said nothing. He ate quickly, his fork scraping the plate, then headed back to the barns without a word. Jack lingered a moment longer, his gray eyes scanning the table before he sat. He ate in silence, but Rachel noticed how he didn't rush. It was as if the meal anchored him, a brief pause in the endless toil. She chose silence as her armor. No questions about the ranch's history, no small talk about the weather that could turn deadly in an instant. Instead, she focused on the tasks scrubbing the floors until they gleamed, mending torn curtains with needle and thread from a dusty sewing kit, stacking firewood in neat rows by the door. The house, once stark and functional, began to soften under her touch. She hummed old country tunes while kneading dough for biscuits, the melodies floating through the rooms like ghosts of warmer days. One afternoon, she gathered dried wildflowers from the edge of the property, brittle stems of lupine and sage, and arranged them in a cracked vase on the kitchen table. It was a small act, but it brought color to the monochrome world. Jack didn't comment at first, but that evening, as he pushed back from his plate of stew, his gaze lingered on the flowers. "Haven't seen those in years," he muttered, almost to himself. Rachel paused in clearing the dishes. "They brighten things up," she replied softly. He nodded once, and that was it. But the next day she found a fresh stack of logs by the stove, more than usual, split evenly and ready to burn. It was his way, she realized, gestures over words. As weeks passed, the silence between them evolved. Jack started staying at the table after meals, nursing a cup of coffee while she washed up. His questions came sparingly like rain in the high desert. "Where'd you learn to cook like that?" he'd ask one night, referring to the apple pie she'd baked from canned fruit. My grandmother's recipes, she'd say, keeping it brief. She didn't mention how those recipes were all she had left of her family, or how cooking had been her escape during the lonely nights in Kansas motels. Another evening, as the wind howled outside, he asked about her education. College? She wiped her hands on a towel. 2 years community college, studied nursing, but life got in the way. He didn't pry further, but his expression softened a flicker in those storm-gray eyes. Rachel shared fragments how she'd once believed in love as something pure until it became a bargaining chip in her family's schemes. It turns you into a commodity, she said, quietly staring into the fire. Jack listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening, as if her words echoed something deep within him. She began noticing details about him, too, the way he avoided certain parts of the ranch, the old barn where rusted tools hung untouched, the photographs on the mantel yellowed with age, a young Jack curly-haired and grinning beside a tall man who must have been his father, and a woman with sun-kissed blonde hair, his mother. All dated before 2008. No recent images, no signs of visitors or holidays celebrated. It painted a picture of a man frozen in time, the ranch his prison and his refuge. One twilight, as Rachel watched from the porch, Jack tended to the cattle in the fading light. His movements were sure efficient, but there was a solitude to them that tugged at her. Luther had gone home early, leaving the ranch quieter than usual. Jack glanced up, catching her eye, and for a moment neither looked away. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was connection, fragile and unspoken. As he turned back to his work, Rachel felt a shift inside her. His presence, once intimidating, was becoming essential, like the stove's warmth against the endless cold. The winter deepened, with a vengeance blanketing the Whitmore ranch in unrelenting snow. Storms rolled in from the north, piling drifts against the barn doors and burying the roads under feet of white. The isolation was complete. The world shrank to the cabin, the barns, and the frozen pastures. Rachel and Jack moved through their days like survivors, bound by the necessities of heat, food, and shelter. The cattle needed constant checking. Hay bales hauled through the wind-water troughs, broken free of ice. Luther hunkered down in his own small cabin, nearby emerging only for chores, leaving the main house to its 2 inhabitants. Evenings became a ritual, a fragile truce against the howling dark. Rachel would finish the day's work, sweeping ash from the stove, mending gloves, worn thin by labor, and settle by the fire with one of the old books from the shelf. Classics gathered dust there: Hemingway, Steinbeck, tales of rugged men and unforgiving lands. She'd read aloud in her soft, steady voice, the words filling the room like smoke. Jack sat across from her, his chair creaking under his weight, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. He rarely spoke, but he listened, his eyes fixed on the flames, as if the stories stirred something long buried. One night, as the wind battered the windows like an angry fist, Rachel closed the book midway through a chapter. The affection between them grew in these small ways, not in grand declarations, but in shared silences that felt less empty. A brush of hands while passing tools, a lingering glance across the table. Yet the winter's grip tightened, testing them. One bitter morning in late February, the water tank in the house ran low. The pipes groaned with the cold, and Rachel volunteered to fetch from the creek, where a thin stream still flowed beneath the ice. Jack had warned her about the dangers, but the snow had let up and she insisted. Bundled in layers, she trudged down the hill, axe in hand, to break the surface. The creek was a frozen ribbon, its edges thick with frost. She tested the ice with her boot, then stepped out carefully. A crack echoed like a gunshot. The ice gave way beneath her, plunging her into the frigid water. The cold was a shock, seizing her lungs, pulling her under. She gasped, arms flailing, but the current dragged at her clothes, numbing her limbs. Help! Her cry was weak, swallowed by the wind. Jack heard it from the barn, a faint echo that sent him bolting out the door. He sprinted down the slope, heart-pounding, boots sinking deep. Without hesitation, he leaped into the breach, the water hitting him like knives. His strong arms wrapped around Rachel, hauling her toward the bank. She clung to him, coughing, her body convulsing from the shock. He dragged her onto the snow, collapsing beside her, his breath ragged. "Rachel, stay with me. Open your eyes." She did barely, her teeth chattering. Don't yell. I hear you." He carried her back to the cabin, kicking open the door. Stripping her wet clothes, he wrapped her in blankets by the fire, rubbing her hands and feet to restore warmth. She slipped into fever, her skin burning despite the chill. For 3 days she hovered between wakefulness and delirium, the fever racking her body. Jack never left her side. He brewed herbal teas from dried roots, changed compresses, even read to her from the book she'd left open, his voice halting, unused to the words but persistent. In her haze, she caught fragments, Jack murmuring as he held her hand. "I lost them once. Couldn't save them. I can't lose you too. Not you." His words pierced the fog, revealing a vulnerability she'd only glimpsed. On the 3rd night, Rachel woke fully, the fever broken. The room was dim lit by the stove's glow. Jack sat slumped in a chair beside the bed, asleep, his hand still clasping hers. She watched him, the lines of worry etched on his face, and felt a surge of emotion she couldn't name. In that moment, amid the cabin's quiet, she knew her feelings for him had taken root, deep and undeniable. Rachel recovered slowly from the fever, her body weak, but her spirit resilient. The cabin felt smaller in the aftermath, the air thick with unspoken words. Jack hovered nearby at first, bringing her broth and checking the fire, but as her strength returned, he withdrew again, his presence a shadow rather than a comfort. She sensed the shift, the way his eyes avoided hers, the tension in his shoulders when she entered a room. It was as if the vulnerability he'd shown during her illness had cracked something open, and now he was scrambling to seal it shut. One afternoon, while Jack was out mending a fence line buried under fresh snow, Rachel decided to tackle the attic. Dust motes danced in the slanted light from a small window as she climbed the ladder, her steps careful on the worn rungs. The space was cluttered with forgotten relics, old saddles, rusted tools, boxes of yellowed papers. She started organizing, wiping away cobwebs, but one box caught her eye, a wooden chest tied with a simple leather cord, no lock, just a knot that came undone with a tug. Inside were letters, dozens of them, their edges frayed and ink faded. They were addressed in a neat looping script to Hannah. Rachel's heart stuttered. She shouldn't read them, but curiosity or perhaps intuition drew her in. The first was dated 2007. "My dearest Hannah, every day on this ranch feels brighter with you here." Skimming others, the story unfolded. Hannah had been Jack's childhood sweetheart, raised on the neighboring spread. They'd grown up riding horses together, sharing dreams of expanding the ranch. Engaged at 25, they'd planned a life amid these hills, but a letter from 2008 shattered it. "I can't believe you're gone. The accident. I should have been there. The fall from that horse. Why didn't I insist on checking the saddle?" Rachel closed the box, her hands trembling. Hannah had died in a riding accident right in Jack's arms. The photos on the mantel ended that year because his world had. No wonder the ranch felt like a tomb. He'd buried his heart with her. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the snow, Rachel waited on the porch. The cold nipped at her cheeks, but she needed the clarity of the open air. Jack approached from the barn, his stride purposeful, until he saw her. He stopped, hat in hand. "You're up," he said gruffly. "I found the letters." She admitted, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "Hannah's." His face hardened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "You had no right." "Maybe not, but I understand now why you keep everyone at arm's length, why this place is your fortress." He looked away toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky. She was everything. We were going to build a life here. One stupid accident, I couldn't save her. His voice cracked raw with years of suppressed grief. After that love, it's a risk I can't take again. Loss like that, it hollows you out. Rachel stepped closer, the porch boards creaking under her boots, but hiding from it. "That's not living, Jack. It's surviving. And if you let those memories chain you, they'll kill you slowly." He met her eyes, then pain swirling in the gray depths. "What do you want from me, Rachel? I gave you a job, a roof. That's all I have left to offer." She swallowed hard, the truth bubbling up. "I thought I could stay here, heal in the quiet. But I can't be a shadow in your life. Not when I've started to feel." She trailed off, the words too heavy. He didn't respond, just turned and walked inside the door, shutting with finality. The next morning, Rachel packed her backpack, her few clothes, the photo from Kansas, a scarf she'd knitted during her recovery. She left a note on the kitchen table, her handwriting neat. "Thank you for saving me more than once, and for showing me that good men still exist. But I can't live in a house full of ghosts. Take care of yourself." She slipped out before dawn, the snow crunching underfoot as she headed toward the main road, hoping to hitch a ride to town. The cold was familiar now, but the ache in her chest was new. Back at the cabin, Jack found the note after feeding the cattle. He read it twice, then sat at the table staring at the empty chair across from him. The house felt colder, the silence heavier. For the first time, he realized solitude wasn't protection. It was emptiness, and without Rachel, the ranch was just land, not a home. Rachel sought refuge in a rundown motel on the outskirts of Jackson, the kind with flickering neon signs and doors that didn't quite latch. The room was sparse, a sagging bed, a heater that rattled like an old engine, windows frosted with ice. She huddled under thin blankets, the storm raging outside, wind whipping snow against the panes. Days blurred into nights. She picked up odd jobs at a local diner, washing dishes for cash, trying not to think of the ranch. But memories intruded, the warmth of the stove, the quiet evenings, Jack's hand in hers during her fever. The blizzard hit hard, blanketing the town in white isolation. Power flickered, the heater sputtered. Rachel lay awake, listening to the gale, when a knock echoed through the door, insistent, almost desperate. She peered through the peephole, Jack cloaked in snow, his face pale under the motel's dim light. She opened the door, and he stepped in, bringing a gust of cold with him. His eyes were wild-haunted. "I can't do it," he said, voice raw. "Live without you. The ranch, it's empty. Those walls, they echo now." In his gloved hand, he held a simple wooden ring, carved roughly from a branch polished by his own efforts in the workshop. Rachel's breath caught. "You came through this storm." "For you," he replied, stepping closer. "I thought solitude was my armor, but it's a cage. Losing Hannah broke me, but losing you, it would end me. Please come back. Build a life with me, not in the shadows, but in the light." She searched his face, seeing the sincerity etched there. Tears welled in her eyes. "Promise me," she whispered. "No more running from love. No more ghosts between us." "I promise," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They embraced, the door still open to the swirling snow, but the warmth between them chased away the cold. Spring arrived like a hesitant dawn, melting the snow into rushing streams, greening the pastures. The ranch bloomed with wildflowers, the cattle lowing in the fresh air. Rachel and Jack rebuilt together, repairing fences side by side, planting a small garden behind the house. Luther grumbled about the changes, but helped his rare smiles approving. They married in a simple ceremony on the ranch under a clear May sky. Luther stood as witness, the local pastor officiating with a worn Bible. No guests, no fanfare, just vows exchanged on the porch where so much had begun. Rachel wore a white dress she'd altered from an old find in town, a bouquet of lupines in her hand. Jack, in his best shirt, looked at her with eyes full of wonder. "I vow to cherish you," he said, voice steady, "to face the storms with you not alone." "And I vow to stand by you," she replied, "to build, not just survive." They kissed as the sun set, sealing their promises. By summer, Rachel felt the first flutters of life within her. The ranch hummed with activity, calves born hay-baled under endless blue skies. One lazy afternoon, as they sat on the porch swing, the breeze carrying scents of earth and pine, she took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly. "Feel that?" she asked, smiling. "Our family's growing. Might need to add a room soon." Jack's hand lingered, his expression softening with awe. He leaned in, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No need for more rooms," he murmured. "You and the baby, you're all the space I need, all the world I want." They sat there as dusk fell, hands intertwined, watching fireflies dance over the fields. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now pulsed with life. Rachel leaned against him, content in the quiet strength they'd forged. In those walls that had once held only echoes of loss, they'd found healing love and a future brighter than the Wyoming sun.